Okay, everybody. Good to see you. Well, good to talk to you anyway. I'm missing all of you, and I hope you are well. We're going to try and keep talking a little bit about our music history. And if you're in my sixth grade general music class, you probably remember we had already been talking a little bit about the medieval period, and then we talked about the Renaissance. And today we're going to focus a little bit more on the Baroque period of music. The Baroque period is one of my favorites, not my favorite, but one of my favorites. The dates, as you can see from my slide, go from 1600 to 1750. And we absolutely have to talk about one of the most important composers of all time, and certainly of the Baroque period, was Johann Sebastian Bach. And Bach fits into this Baroque period. His life uh, ends at 1750. And that's meaningful because when Bach dies, it's kind of like game over. The Baroque period's done because Bach died. And that's how important he actually was. The word Baroque, it's kind of a funny word. It looks like barbecue, maybe, or something. I don't know. Like I always say, if it's not Baroque, don't fix it. Ha 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 ha. Anyway, it comes from the Portuguese language, and there's a Portuguese word that is barraco, and I know that sounds a little bit like Barack Obama, but it has nothing to do at all with politics. Instead, they're talking about in Portugal when the deep sea divers go down and try to get pearls. When they find a pearl that's perfectly white, that's what they're looking for. That's beautiful to them. If it has any kind of occlusion or color to it, maybe the oyster was making that pearl, got something in there while they were making the pearl and it irritated it. Now it's worth a little bit less. It's almost like when somebody put too much decoration on something, it makes it a little tacky. And so what we're looking at here, this picture of a European church, and that reminds me of the word Baroque in a little way because of the way they really over decorated the church. You can see that there's all kinds of gold filigree, and every corner is filled with some kind of decoration. And the music sounds like that too. It sounds like they tried to cram in too much music, if that's possible. Here's a little bit of the Brandenburg Concerto by Bach, which is really beautiful music. Check it out. Doesn't that music just sound like it goes with that church? Anyway, that's the idea. You can hear that music and you get the idea of the Baroque period and how that music kind of sounded to them. Compare it a little bit real quick to an American church. This would be a church you might find in the United States around the same time, around the colonial days or just before the colonial times. And you could see that the church, whoops, sorry, the church is very stark and kind of simple in contrast to that European church with all the decoration. American church, European church. Wow, pretty different. And that kind of gives you the idea like how Baroque is sort of over decorated, almost kind of tacky. Kind of reminds me of the way my dad decorates his house for Christmas. Oh, sorry, Dad. Hope you're not hearing this. Anyway, the sound of the Baroque music, the music people will say has a very melodious kind of spinning quality. It can be very energetic, sounding almost like it's not taking a rest. It just has this very organic, kind of keep on trudging kind of sound to it. And another feature of Baroque music is that they include a lot of trills. And I wrote to you that it has trills and frills. So it sounds fancy and it has a lot of these kinds of ideas of the trill. If you're an instrumentalist, maybe you play the flute or the trumpet or the violin, even pianists, you might be used to doing trills. Trills are that idea where you're going to play a note and play the next note um, above it very, very quickly. I gave you a piece of music here where you're going to hear some trills. This is called trumpet voluntary. You might have heard this, and it comes from the Baroque era, but you might have heard this at a wedding or something before. This is trumpet voluntary. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to cut that off. All right, anyway, that's trumpet voluntary. So again, we really have to talk about the most famous composer of this period, without a doubt, is Johann Sebastian Bach. As you can see, he lived from 1685 to 1750. And if you could do the math real quick, yep, 65 years old. That's a pretty good lifespan for somebody in those days. And Bach was born in Germany to a very, very musical family. So musical, in fact, that we always have to say JS or Johann Sebastian Bach when we're talking about him, because he is so important and had so many siblings and his own children who were famous musicians. Bach was very, very devoted to the church. So he wrote a lot of music for the church. You can imagine every Sunday he had to write something new. He also was an incredible organist. And something really remarkable about him, well, historians aren't totally sure. He had either 20 or 21 children. And students always ask me, Mr. Wall, how's that possible? Well, he was married to his first wife for 7 years, and she unfortunately passed away. And he had 7 children with his first wife, and then with his second wife, we think he had 13 more. So that's how he ended up with 20 or 21 children. Bach wrote all kinds of music except opera. He found opera kind of silly. And he often said, why should people have to dress up in costumes and have scenery? Just let the music do the talking. And so Bach really felt like opera was kind of silly. But most of the music he wrote was for the church or for his students. And you can imagine if you had 20 or 21 children, you'd be very busy trying to pay the bills and making sure everybody got fed. So he was doing a lot of teaching of private lessons and getting his money, his pay as a church organist. I've attached to you, or on my website, you can find a link to the Toccata and Fugue in D minor. And I want you to go and listen and watch that. It gives us not only a good idea of the kind of music that Bach wrote, you're going to recognize this piece of music, but you're also going to get a really good glimpse of a full-sized organ, and a very beautiful organ. So make sure you go and you watch that and check that out. I like this picture. Bach is sitting here with all these children. We don't know if these are all his, but we can imagine that maybe this is a private student and the kids are kind of gathered around Bach. And the other thing I like about this picture is Bach is playing something that looks like a piano. Oops, wait a minute, got to be accurate. That's not actually a piano. The piano wasn't even invented quite yet. Very likely, I would say that's a harpsichord. This is the YouTube link, but don't worry about that, guys. You'll also be able to find that YouTube link on my website and just click and watch it, okay? Kids are standing here saying, Dad, we're hungry. Can we go to drive-through for dinner? We think, Dad, how about Wendy's? No, I want Burger King. No, McDonald's. And then they start a musical fight. Cool. Also, guys, we have to talk at least about one other composer, one of my favorite, George Frederick Handel. Handel was also born in 1685, and he lived to 1759. Handel was born in Germany, but he really went on to become famous in England. And he sort of was a court composer for the King of England at the time. I believe it was King George, but I can't remember which number. But he's really famous for his operas and his oratorios. But he also wrote some pretty interesting orchestral music, and he's famous for these pieces of music that he wrote for these royal parties. So one of these parties was the king was going to have some fireworks, and so the king said, hey, Handel, you got to write me some music for my fireworks party. And the other one that I really love is the water music. The king would decide, oh, you know, the weather looks great tomorrow. We're all going to go out on our boats and we're going to float down the River Thames. We're going to have some really nice snacks. And by the way, Handel, write me some music for my party. So here's a little royal water music that Handel wrote for one of the king's parties. And it's really very Baroque. Check it out. Ah, yes, there we are, the royal water music. You could imagine us floating down the Erie Canal from Pittsford and having some lovely snacks listening to Handel. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching and checking out the PowerPoint and learning a little bit more about the Baroque period. Don't forget to answer the questions. The questions are there for you. Very easy questions, but if you could just send me a response, that's how I know you have watched this. And send the response to me, and you do that through your Office 365 on Microsoft Forms. Okay? Sounds good. I look forward to seeing you soon, and thanks, guys. Hope you have a good day.